Okay, we're about to get started here with Amity. I know we're still missing some people, but we need to get on schedule. We have lunch to eat soon, right? And as a reminder, too, for lunch, there are places across the street. There's a list outside. You can ask any of us here at the state office for maybe help, but probably Jenny's the best person to ask. She knows a lot about food around here. She's shaking her head no, but I think she is. The list is good, she says, so you can trust the list. Okay, so I don't know. Let me check in.
Well, it shows it's here. Yeah, but they're right there. Oh, it's just not the presenter version. Yeah. Here. Ah, there we go.
Okay, you're good then.
I'm good.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'll pass it over to her. So this is Amity here. And we're really happy to have Amity here. She's with NORC. Do I say that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Like, wait, is it consumer? I have it right in front of me. Prior to joining Consumer Voice, I should stick to my script. Amity served as a local long-term care ombudsman here in Texas. For 6 years, she advocated for residents in 65 nursing homes and 130 assisted living facilities in a 12-county region. So she actually covered our Houston-Galveston program. Yeah, Houston-Galveston. Woo! So she came back to Texas to present to us. During her time in Texas, she led the formation of the Gulf Coast Culture Change Coalition, which results in 2 free conferences for long-term care consumers, providers, advocates, and regulators. She also had the pleasure of representing a few local ombudsmen on the board of directors for NALCO, so the National Association of Local Long-Term Care Ombudsmen. So she also served in that role. And she was actually, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, she was the MLO for the Houston-Galveston program. So we're really happy to have her here and have her expertise. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to her.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I am so glad to be here with you today, and I didn't realize that this was your first time all together in person, so now it feels even extra special. I wanted to follow up on some things that Bev said, actually, just to close that loop. Closures have been on top of mind for us as well at the Resource Center, and we developed a fact sheet that's not final yet, but hopefully will come out shortly based on the Consumer Voice Toolkit. They have an entire toolkit on nursing home closures and the ombudsman role in those. So we made it into a fact sheet to hopefully lead you to that entire toolkit and use those resources, but expect probably a training in our year 2 of this grant. Also, volunteer management. I can't remember who asked in the back with the awesome hair. Yeah, we saw that. We know that you're struggling. Volunteer hours alone across the country were cut in half. So we know that that's directly impacting your work. So we're trying to beef up any kind of services and support and technical assistance we can at the Resource Center. If you are not already on the volunteer management listserv, I encourage you to join that. I will send links to the office to send out to you all afterwards. And then we're also starting in year 2 of this grant cycle, a new open technical assistance hour, like office hours, to where it's just, hey, you can join our call and we're going to talk about whatever you want to talk about, and we're going to provide resources and support and a lot of peer-to-peer sharing. And we're going to focus on volunteer management starting out for the first few months. So join those calls, share your best practices, share your struggles, and we can all learn from each other. Okay. Emergency preparedness. I can't remember who asked about that. Thank you. I actually went to the US Aging Conference and heard from an ombudsman program that did a lot of great work in Colorado on emergency preparedness. They pulled together a COOP, which is a cool, can't remember, anyone know that acronym? I wrote it down on my other notes, but long story short, I jotted them down. I'm going to reach out to them and see how we can coordinate with them for some more training in that area. And I'm hoping this COOP is something that you all could implement. So it's not so much even just the role of the Ombudsman program in assisting residents, but it's how do you keep yourself safe, your office safe, your entire program in disasters, whether they're natural or unfortunately man-made. Okay, close that loop. So today I'm going to talk to you about documentation. I realize it may not be the most interesting, exciting, sexiest topic to talk about, so I'm glad we're starting in the morning when you're hopefully well caffeinated. And then I'm the only thing in the way of your lunch, so that's excellent. But I hope that you'll walk away with at least a few new insights, some tips that you can utilize in your work and also share with your staff and your volunteers. I want to make this pretty interactive, so we have some callbacks. I'll ask you some questions. You holler out your answers. We have some videos you can watch. We will watch and some activities. But if you could hold your questions till the very end, just so I can make sure to get through my slides, that would be great. Okay, overcoming barriers to documentation is critical and key. What gets in the way of documentation for you? Time, yep. What about your staff and/or your volunteers? Time, baby? Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Right. You're almost reliving the trauma and all the feelings that you had during that case. That's a really good point, and one I didn't have on my slide, so thank you. Yes. Oh, okay. She said if it's a really difficult, challenging, and emotional case, she's having to relive all of that as she's documenting it after living that before. Yes. Underestimating how long it takes to do the data entry. Yes. Excellent. So those are all great barriers. Some other barriers may be disorganization, poor computer skills. Not all you in here, I know, it's probably someone else. Too many distractions, and of course, time management. Who here, just raise your hand, thinks that you're good at multitasking? Yeah, okay. I'm surprised I didn't see more hands up because usually you hear a lot of people bragging about that. Or maybe we all realized during COVID when we're working from home that we're really not good at that. So multitasking is certainly a myth. There's actually research out there that says only 2% of the population can truly multitask. So others may have a hard time identifying priorities, deciding what's important versus urgent, and then, like you said, allocating appropriate time. What are some distractions that prevent someone from documenting? Phone calls, emails, etc. So you may already do this and practice this, but I'm here to give you permission, to give yourself permission to turn off those notifications for a little bit so you're not hearing that constant ping on your email and that distracts you and you think you need to respond immediately. And maybe I'll be fired already 2 slides into this presentation. But the Ombudsman program, you are not first responders, okay? You're not first responders. You don't see anywhere in your policies and procedures you have to respond immediately, correct? All right, so just keep that in mind. You have extremely important work, but you also have to take care of you and manage your time, and you're really not doing all your work if you don't have enough time to document it. So block your emails, turn them off, the notifications for a little bit, block some time on your calendar so people don't book meetings whenever you're actually going to have some focus time. And hopefully that'll give you a little bit more time control over your time. Okay, so we are going to watch this video. Just to give you a heads up, it's about 5 minutes long, and you'll hear him cue you to write something down. So I gave you 2 handouts. The first one is switch tasking as a thief, so just have this one ready, and we'll work through this little activity. And also wanted to plug, we are not promoting him or his book officially as the Resource Center, but I just wanted to share this because we thought it was great.
Trying to multitask may feel effective, but it's actually counterproductive. In fact, it doesn't really exist. Not in the way most people think about it. In my book, The Myth of Multitasking, I show that what's occurring is either backtasking or switch tasking. You backtask when something that doesn't require your attention occurs in the background, like baking bread in the oven while you make a salad. Backtasking can be productive, but the problem is most people who think they're multitasking aren't backtasking, they're switch tasking. Switch tasking occurs when you try to do two or more attention-requiring tasks at the same time, like trying to watch this video while you're sending a text message. Switch tasking is everywhere, and it's a thief. It robs you of time, money, and your mental and emotional health. You're going to experience firsthand what I mean in this little exercise. Grab a piece of paper and a pen or pencil. Turn that paper sideways and draw 3 evenly spaced lines across it. This gives you 4 empty rows. By the way, there's also a downloadable worksheet with all these instructions available at the link on the screen. But for now, a pen and paper will do. Now this exercise is timed, so don't start until I say go. You're going to recopy in the first row this phrase, switch tasking is a thief. Then in the second row, you're just going to write the numbers 1 through through 21, one number for each letter in the phrase. Make your paper look just like what you see on the screen. I'll call out the time every 5 seconds so you'll know your rough finish time. Got your pen and paper in front of you? Get ready, get set, and go. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. 20. We'll go 10 more. 25. And 30. And most people should be done by this point. Write down your approximate finish time. Now, we're going to do this again, but we're going to simulate switch tasking, trying to perform multiple attention requiring tasks at the same time. So you're going to, again, recopy the phrase, switch tasking is a thief, in the third row, and all the numbers 1 through 21 in the fourth row. But this time, for every letter that you write in the third row, you're going to write the corresponding number in the fourth row. So you'll write S and then 1, W and then 2, I and then 3, and so on until you make the third and fourth row look just like what you did the first time you did this. We'll time this again with me calling out the time every 5 seconds. Get your paper and your pencil ready, get set, and go. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. 20. 25. 30. This is where we were when we stopped last time. 35. 40. 45. 50 seconds. We'll go 10 more. 55. And 60. And if you're not done now, just give up. You just experienced a taste of the first 3 effects of switch tasking. First, the amount of time it takes to complete things increases. In some of your cases, up to twice as long as the first time. Second, the quality of the work decreases. Compare the work you did each time. Did you make mistakes? Did you finish on a number other than 21? Did your handwriting get worse? And third, consider how you felt the first time versus the second time. Most people, when they switch task, start to feel a lot of stress, even with a simple activity like this. Switch tasking is a thief. But the good news is, when you reduce switches, you'll have more free time. You'll make fewer mistakes, and you'll feel less stress. To regain control, think about your upcoming day and decide what's one task you're going to give 100% of your attention. And to learn more about how to reduce switch tasking, check out my book, The Myth of Multitasking, at multitaskbook.com.
I think I can tell by your giggles that the second one, or the longest one at the very end, was a bit different than the first 2 when you were focusing. So obviously this doesn't just apply to documenting, it applies to everything. When you're maybe listening to a webinar and I'm just going to check my emails while I'm listening to this training webinar I'm supposed to be paying attention to. So this might be a good exercise for you to do even with your trainees, your new volunteers, or your staff to help reiterate how important focus is. All right, so your advocacy is important and valuable. We heard that from Bev. I was so glad she shared that t-shirt with you. And you know that in your heart, that's why you're still here for 25 years. So Ombudsman Program representatives improve the quality of life and the quality of care for residents on a daily basis. The only way to prove this, though, is through timely and thorough documentation. Information is documented both informally, such as when you're out in the field and maybe you're using a pen and paper or an electronic device, and formally in a state-approved database. That database records, obviously, well, the informal documentation is used to immediately record observations, interviews, and then it's entered into the formal records related to all the program activities and cases. As you know, your state ombudsman, Patty, is required to report, I'm sorry, I'm trying to minimize all these notifications. There we go. Report specific information and activities to the Administration for Community Living, ACL, and you saw some of the data that Bev shared and what a difference that makes whenever you collate that across the country. And that's summarized in the Uniform Data Collection System called NORS, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. The reports you submit about your visits and complaints tell the resident's story. If you don't document your activities and submit them, those stories are not told. Your documentation turns into data that goes from the local level to the state level and then the federal level. And then the data paints a picture of the effectiveness of the entire national program. The data is also used to show Congress and other decision makers what trends are apparent, where the system is lacking, and what laws need to be modified or created. NORS data is used in a variety of ways, informing policy both at the local, state, and national level, budget justification, as you heard from Bev. Why would you need more money if you can't do anything with the money you already have, right? So you have to justify that. Program management at every level. Local programs look at your data as well, and that informs your program management. Educating the public and responding to media requests. And those are just a few dated now articles that cited NORS data. And we talk to reporters at the national level all the time, and I often refer to NORS data and then refer out to specific states based on whatever issue the reporter is interested in. So just to reiterate, the work you do and the documentation of cases, complaints, and outcome is not collected anywhere else. Not survey data, not the 5-star rating system, none of that. The Ombudsman Program is the only program that's solely focused on the health, safety, welfare, and rights of residents. The resident-centered approach that you use in your work and complaint handling means that you truly reflect the problems and needs of the residents. This is valuable information, and I want to extend my appreciation for all of your work and the documentation of that work. I know it takes time, but it's important and magnifies the resident's voice. So we're going to watch this very short video, less than 2 minutes. And it's part of a video out of California about obtaining and documenting consent.
And this leads us into, if it's not in the database, it didn't happen. It is really important that you record a detailed step-by-step summary of what happened, and it's updated on a regular basis. Documentation is proof that the Ombudsman has fully served the resident. It also allows for the Ombudsman's organization to show the community all the good work you have done, and it protects you. It also allows for large-scale problems to be found and solved. For example, if we find 20 different complaint investigations that all have the same delay, that might be due to a larger systematic problem, and so we can work together to improve the process for everyone's benefit. To recap, obtaining consent isn't an afterthought. It is the beginning of every investigation. It's the Ombudsman's responsibility to ensure that the resident is free from any kind of pressure when giving consent and understands the actions that will be taken on their behalf. Consent is required because it demonstrates that the Ombudsman is working on the resident's behalf. By recording your complaint investigations and activities in the database, you provide important information to your organization that allows for large-scale process improvements to take place. And it also protects the Ombudsman. Remember, if you have any uncertainty, call the office.
So, what did that video say? If it's not in the database, awesome. And documentation is proof that the Ombudsman has served the resident. Excellent, thank you. All right. As you likely already do, and this is really just a plug, I did see that we have quite a few folks that are new under 6 months, but I'm sure you learned this in your training. When taking notes, those informal notes I mentioned earlier, in front of a resident, a family member, or resident representative, make sure to let them know that your notes are confidential. You won't share them with anyone. You are just doing it to help with your own memory. Because there were a few times when I was a rookie ombudsman, I'd start taking notes because I can't remember anything. And some folks immediately became uncomfortable. And why are you writing that down? Why are you writing down what I said? So just make sure that you preempt that by saying something like these 2 examples. And, nope, that didn't change. There we go. Too many clicks. The foundation of all documentation starts with the 5 W's. Who, what, where, when, and why. Document only the information related to the issue or the strategy to resolve the problem. The 5 W's are the facts of the case. Who's involved? Include the names, titles, the relationship to the resident. What exactly is the complaint? What happened, or is it still an ongoing issue? And what information is or was obtained related to the complaint? Where did the problem occur? When did it happen? Include dates and locations. Why did the complaint arise? Have you identified a root cause already? What is that? And of course, in addition to the 5 W's, don't forget the how when documenting the facts of the case, starting with how you obtain the complaint to begin with, and document how the complaint affects the residents, and ideally from obviously their perspective and including some quotes if possible. Proper documentation clarifies the information gathered and can impact the investigation strategy. Effective documentation must be factual, objective, and consistent. Your case documentation should be clear enough that if another representative had to step in for you, they could pick up where you left off. Effective documentation is also in chronological order, concise, and entered as soon as possible in the database. I'll give you a little bit of time to read these 2 examples, and then I want to walk through and see what you think about them. What if the example is effective or ineffective documentation in your opinion, and why? All right, so any thoughts on number 1? Do you think that's effective or ineffective documentation, and why? Yeah.
Getting your steps in, right? I feel like that's really ineffective. It has a lot of like extra information that's not necessary to the documentation. Whereas, do you want to talk about number 2? Whereas number 2 is really straightforward and to the point. It's documenting exactly what the ombudsman did and their thoughts on that particular visit.
Thank you. What was your name? Thanks, Jessica. Okay, so number 1, yes, ineffective. And in addition to what Jessica said, you may notice that they mention 2 women, Sharon and Kim, but never really identify who Sharon and Kim are. Who's the activity director? Who's the resident? Is it just a family member that walked in or a volunteer? And number 2, anyone have an opinion on number 2 about it effective or ineffective?
Okay. I think number 2 is ineffective because there's an I think statement in there. And I think we need to remain factual in our documentation. And there's no proof that they put in there to back up their reasons for thinking that the resident is being influenced.
Did you read my notes? Because that's exactly what it says. Jessica, I do agree with you that it is chronological and it is very clear, a lot clearer than the first one. However, it doesn't say when they followed up with Ralph, what the outcome was, the next steps, and that seems uncertain phrase is very vague, and then it states an opinion without any facts backing it up. Exactly, thank you. Okay, I'll give you a little bit more time to read this long one. Okay, I see some eyes looking at me. So aside from it being lengthy, do you think it's effective or ineffective documentation, and why? Seeing head nods, I think that means effective. Okay. Any reason why you think it's effective? Dates and times. Waiting times, names of residents, yep. And experiencing at the time, yep, absolutely. You could almost feel like you were there. Yep, paints a very clear picture. It's factual, it's concise, names and titles, as you mentioned. Free from unknown abbreviations. I think sometimes we may do that and not even think about it. And it also includes next steps. So that next person, if you got in a car accident or something, could pick it up right after you left off. Okay, fact or opinion. Individuals have a natural tendency to really simplify descriptions by using perceptions or opinions instead of just stating the facts. For example, a statement such as "the resident was sad" is an assumption due to seeing a resident that was crying. It could be, I cry all the time, happy, sad, whatever, hungry. The habit of opinionating may influence your interpretation of a situation and could negatively impact factual documentation. So it's important to avoid allowing personal feelings, preconceived notions, or interpretation into your documentation. What do you think the difference is between these 2 examples? Okay. No one? That's okay. All right, the difference between the 2, the first one uses opinions instead of facts, and the second one is simply factual. saying what that person did. They raised their voice. If you say yelled, that could be taken a lot of different ways. And then saying he always gets mad when I bring this up. That's your opinion. Could be mad for a lot of other reasons that day. Who knows? And I've been asked if you could raise your hand and speak into the mic because I keep forgetting this is being recorded. So even though I'm repeating back, it would be helpful to come from y'all. When documenting, use objective language instead of subjective. Objective language is not influenced by personal feelings or opinions, and it's used to clearly communicate facts. When objective language is used, two people reading one description should have the same understanding. Subjective language is based on personal opinions, interpretations, emotions, and a big one, judgments. It's often open to different interpretations. So what do you think of these statements, objective or subjective? I heard the last one is subjective. Great. First one, objective, clearly states what they saw and witnessed. Last two, subjective. Excellent. Here are just a few more examples of objective and subjective language. A really important thing, and maybe even easier to remember, at least for me it is, objective language describes behaviors. Subjective language labels behaviors. And I think that's really important in the ombudsman world because we are always resident focused, resident first, person first language. This plays right into this. So for example, for objective language, you could say something like, the care plan coordinator said she had no comment when asked to reschedule the care plan conference. She raised her hands in the air and stated she had another appointment to get to and this conversation was over. I'm sure when you were in the room, it felt very much different than how that was reported. It was something like this, and this meeting is over, and it gets really awkward and tense. But the way it's reported there is factual. You can see what happened. You're not passing judgment. Subjective language, the care plan coordinator was rude and unresponsive to my question. That might be true. Okay, that may be your experience, but that's not what you need to document in the record. In addition to ensuring you use objective language in your documentation, you can also model this when communicating with facility staff, your volunteers, and others. I think it'll be really helpful in ensuring that communication with and about residents remains objective. You're not placing labels, and by you communicating like that, hopefully others will as well. So, can you give me some ideas of some difficult situations that you've had to document? Anyone? Arguments, disagreements, abusive or threatening interactions, frequent callers? Anyone frequent callers? Uncooperative facility staff? I'm sorry, you may not be able to hear over this situation. Any other difficult situations? Inappropriate behavior, maybe? Inappropriate behavior? Ombudsman interference and retaliation. Okay, take a moment, if you would, turn over your switch tasking document and write down what you just saw happen. Please. Thank you. Thank you. Take a bow. give you a few more seconds to wrap up. All right. If you still have a little bit more to add, you can add while I'm talking. That's fine. I'll let you multitask, okay, this one time. Just because I'm looking at the time and I want y'all to be able to break for lunch today. Okay, thank you. So what do you think is different between documenting a difficult situation and typical case documentation? Staying objective? Stating facts? Yes, trying to remember everything that happened, because whenever it's a stressful moment, it's harder to remember, yeah? Yep, absolutely. Trying to cover both sides equally. Thank you. Because that would be part of being accurate. All right, so yes, there could be strong emotions or opinions, right? And that's going to influence possibly, and you're going to have to take a step back, a few breaths before documenting, or at least reread it, or maybe just write it and don't save it. Get all your emotions out, kind of like the therapy where you're writing a letter to someone that you never send. Get it all out, but don't put it in the actual file. It may include a situation where criticism is actually directed towards you and your work, and so it may feel very personal. Due to that heightened situation, your documentation may be more likely to be reviewed by your supervisor, especially if it's one of those you had to bring somebody in on or questioned. You may need to provide more factual background information than usual if it's a pretty intense case. So for example, there may be situations where there's a frequent caller, and so you're going to have to provide some background about why the program limited the time you can spend on those calls with that caller. To provide some context, so it doesn't look like you're just telling, you know, John that you can't talk to him or something like that. Aside from all the other reasons that you know or have already heard and shared with me, other reasons to consider is that it accurately and appropriately documenting actions as a representative provides support, and as they said in the video, protection, that you're performing your designated duties. That protects you, as you may only be held liable if you're acting outside the scope of your duties or not acting in good faith. Okay, in terms of providing a detailed and reliable history of the events, how do these examples differ? Which one do you think is more accurate and professional? Yeah. Number two, and sadly, I know I heard this before, so sometimes, and this is a whole nother training presentation, but just setting out the expectations and really the role and responsibilities of your program could hopefully prevent this from happening, but not always, because we're all people, and sometimes people get really frustrated when there's no change. So yeah, bullet number two would, it shows accountability. It shows what Jan did in order to try to remedy the situation as best as possible. It showed she was very professional in a very uncomfortable situation. Oh, and then one more thing. If you were just to document, Bill said he wanted to close the case. If someone else knew about this and were reading that, they may think that you're hiding something. So just wanted to add that too. Concise documentation avoids unnecessary information, and you may actually be able to save time for other aspects of your work, resident contact with proper record keeping. When possible, and if it's directly applicable, include quotes, emails, text, especially in those sticky situations when you think you may have extra oversight. If there's anything sent to you in writing, especially if it's an upset family member, upset resident, facility staff, I'd keep that and add it to your documentation. It may be helpful to keep in mind in these situations who may read your documentation, especially in those difficult situations. When could your documentation be disclosed? Anyone? A court order. Subpoenas are a little bit different because you could still fight one, but I like where you're going. And only at the discretion of the state ombudsman, regardless of any of the other factors, regardless if you get a court order, regardless if a resident asks for it and it's a resident's own case, still need permission from the state ombudsman. So make sure you follow your state policies and procedures and communicate with your supervisor and the state ombudsman as necessary. Or the state office, because y'all have so many awesome staff at the state office. I'm used to saying state ombudsman because a lot of states only have the state ombudsman in their state office. So y'all are really lucky to have such a great support team. For individuals that contact you frequently, do you have any successful practices related to documenting when that happens? Does this ever happen to you? Yep. That's okay. We're going to get to that. And we can even share, if y'all think of any other best practices or you implement something afterwards and you let me know, we can always add your examples to this. To help you determine where information goes, here are some considerations. Does the information belong in an individual case or a case related to all residents in that facility or a group of residents? How do you know? Is the information worthy of documenting but not related to a case? So maybe it's a frequent caller that's complaining about you, the ombudsman. Does that need to go somewhere else? Because maybe that'll trickle up to your supervisor or the state ombudsman to investigate grievances. And then where does that need to go? Consider and separate information that does not directly relate to the complaint and the specific resident from the information that does not, or that does. So some examples. I'm going to give you some background information while you read this. The Ombudsman program has had several cases over the past couple of years for this resident named Paul. Paul cannot communicate informed consent. The current complaint is due to poor care. The guardian of the resident is not happy with the representative named Jean with her work on the case and often calls Jean several times a day to complain. When the guardian gets angry, he yells and curses at her. These 3 calls happen in one afternoon. So as you're reading it, I just want to point out that there's quotes in there, which is great. Jean brought in the supervisor. Jean gave him options. If you're not happy with my services, then definitely I'd like for you to talk to my supervisor. Let's get my supervisor involved. They were all on the call together, so they're all hearing the same thing. So that's added layer of protection. And then, wow, what a happy ending. He called back and apologized for yelling and said it would be okay for Jean to proceed with the case and speak with the DON. So well documented. Would you put all of this in the resident's case file? Out of curiosity. Yeah. Yeah, I would too, since it's related to a complaint. It wasn't just calling about her inability, in his opinion, to resolve the complaint. It did relate to an actual complaint. And then there's going to be additional steps after that. So then Jean called the DON. This is what the DON said. And this is how I'm going to proceed. So I've already gone over this. I'm going to skip that one. I want you to look at this one and let me know what you think. There's actually two bullets. Which one's effective, ineffective? Do you see any issues with either one of these? All right, any initial thoughts jump out from that first bullet? Any concerns you have? Yeah, you think? It's like a soap opera. Yeah. Yep. What else? Jumped around too much? Yep, not chronological. Did the writer state their opinion as well? My perception is. I mean, maybe on that day, everyone seemed happy. That's great. Does that mean the facility is always responsive to their needs? Doubtful. Just in my 17 years of experience. Also, I was curious, what happened to Betty? She did say her room was always cold. The writer didn't say they followed up with Betty. Is this something you've tried to address, Betty? Do you want my help? Etc. So just a few more examples. And I am not going to review this again because I think I've drilled this home: accurate, complete, and timely. But I do want to hear from you all. How do you think your documentation went about that little incident that happened earlier? Anyone want to share their example?
We know y'all aren't this shy. Feel free to
You can
raise your
pass it to a
hands.
friend and ask them to read it if you want.
Nelda's going to volunteer. Mary,
No. I just said Julie took a call while in the conference presentation. She was asked to step outside so the presenter could continue presenting.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Jenny took a phone call during the meeting. Julie asked her to please step outside. Jenny continued to engage in her phone call after moving to the back of the room. Alexa then asked her to please step outside. Jenny threw her paper on the floor, and they both exited the room.
Thanks. A little bit more detail about Jenny's little fit. Getting to know you really quickly, Jenny. Yeah.
So I just said, Ombudsman observed Jenny answer the phone during documentation training and engaged in a cell phone conversation in a raised voice, and was then asked to leave the room. She left the room and returned shortly later.
Thank you very much. Great job, y'all. Okay, so before I get to our resources, because I do want to trying to get y'all out on time for lunch, and I do want to leave some time for questions or just hear from you all. In closing, make sure you review and follow your policies and procedures and share your best practices. Let folks know what you're doing that may be extra helpful as far as managing your time, managing distractions. Consult with your supervisor and/or the state office about documentation questions. Review your volunteer reports for quality, at least quarterly, and provide some additional training and technical assistance as needed. Review your documentation, your own documentation, to ensure you only include facts and that it's complete, concise, and accurate. All right, so I'm going to run through these resources and take questions. A lot of this slide deck was a combination of two different presentations, but most of it can be found in our revised certification training manual that Bev mentioned earlier in Module 10, if you're interested. And just so you know, everything in that manual can be adapted. So we put them in as PowerPoint forms and Word forms documents, so you can adapt them and use them as necessary. I put on your desk, well, I didn't. I put on some. Thank you, Joe, for covering the rest. Case notes checklist. This was also pulled out from the certification training. I put it in this format, thinking it may be useful for you, especially you new ombuds, to review your case notes and may be helpful whenever you're training your volunteers as well, or providing some technical assistance. I know whenever I receive criticism, even if it's constructive criticism, it may sting a little bit. So if you have a checklist that you can review with your volunteers and say, hey, Joe, I was checking out your documentation and I just want to review this checklist with you and share this as a tool that you can use in the reports you submit to us. That may be a little bit easier to start that conversation. So have you seen this resource? Just show of hands. Oh, No? Okay. We have a really dense website, so that's not too surprising. This came out a few years ago. It's talking about working with families, tips for effective communication, and strategies for challenging situations. Because as you know, family members are amazing advocates for their loved ones. Some of them may not be. Some of them you may have some communication barriers in working with some families. So this walks you through some actual scenarios. It gives you some prompts, some ways to effectively communicate your role as an ombudsman representative. And it even includes a documentation tip checklist for family members. So if you're working with family members and trying to help de-escalate a situation and help that family member present a case or complaint and work with the facility, this may be helpful for you to share with them. So please download this. It has a lot of information that you can use. And I think we did a webinar back in 20-something. And then, of course, I can't not mention NORS. This is our landing page for NORS. I hope many of y'all have seen this part. We have all of the NORS data. We have the NORS training materials. We have frequently asked questions about NORS all on this landing page. So please visit that. If we update something, it'll say next to it that it's been updated. So make sure you're using the most recent example. Okay. I'm out of breath and sweaty, but other than that, I'm good. 7 minutes left for questions or comments. Yeah.
I just wanted you to tell me how you would describe what happened in your words.
In my, do I
yeah.
remember what happened? No. I would have been very close to a combination of all three of the examples and just led off with the very factual. She took a phone call during the presentation. I may have even added, but I'm not really sure it really relates, but Julie earlier told us not to take calls during the training, so I may have added that as well. And then just made sure to provide, like she did, that she threw her paper on the ground and maybe even said she stomped her foot before leaving to show how aggravated she was. So, yeah. But I think the most important part, and all three of y'all did that, is none of you said she was angry, she was rude, she took a phone call in the middle of the meeting, didn't add any of that personal, subjective feedback. Good job. Yes.
I just want to comment that it totally depends on where you are in the room. I had no idea if she was on the phone. I didn't hear Julie tell her to step outside. I did not see her because I'm here. I'm trying to listen to you and watch the presentation. I missed all of that. Yeah. So I wrote down, someone in the audience began speaking loudly while the presenter continued presenting material.
Yeah.
That's what
I think that's great though, because that's what you witnessed.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I just want to point out, it totally depends on your point of view and where you are in the situation.
Right.
And like the fire truck example and all that going on, I was bothered by that. Just because, okay, 15 minutes, no other concerns, I'm out of here, bye.
Right. Right.
Really?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. No, excellent point. Thank you. And it doesn't have to just be about this presentation. I'm just excited to be here from the Resource Center to answer any of your questions. And I want to put a plug in because I do have time. So I'm going to hold this mic for the next 5 minutes. Keep an eye on your inbox because we are sending a questionnaire to all ombudsman representatives and state ombudsmen asking how we're doing, just a check-in from the Resource Center, and what you want from us, because we are just starting our next year of this grant cycle in this month, and so we're looking at new projects. We already have a work plan, but if we are flexible and want to respond to your needs. So if you have any input, my contact information is on this slide. Yes.
Hi, everybody. Angel from Houston. Question about the WellSky, right? The system that we use to enter in. Are there any plans for, them making an app or something that we could use for, those of us that we cover 12 counties surrounding Harris County. So we're commuting, 3 to 4 hours just to get to one facility. And
Right.
so oftentimes, I'm looking at the level of detail that y'all are asking for, including quotes, things like that. So, when I drive 3 hours to get to Brookshire,
Yep.
and then meet and do my facility visit and cover as much as I can, it's really difficult unless I could have like an app to where I could like enter in information as I'm dealing with the case, or immediately when I get in the car,
Mhm.
as opposed to getting home at 7 o'clock at night and then trying to remember all the quotes. And so I'm finding it's really frustrating because I really do want to keep track of everything and make sure that you guys get the full picture. I mean, I print out my emails and copy my emails as attachments so you can see all the conversations. But as far as, talking to a resident or having a phone call, even getting a phone call or something, if you're not sitting there right within the next 15 to 30 minutes to write it down, how much detail are you really going to capture?
Right.
So that's one of my challenges.
So I have to say, and again, maybe I'll be fired, but I was in your shoes 17 years ago, the exact same region, doing those drives. I get it. But we didn't even have cell phones or a tablet. So everything was in writing. And I did a whole lot of taking notes as folks were talking. I didn't include quotes in all of my case notes. But, excuse me, if a complaint was really serious, or I knew there may be blowback, if there was a guardian involved, a family member that was having conflict with another family member about their resident. So if I knew it would be a contentious case, then I was extra careful to try to put those quotes in and get more information and make sure my documentation was really solid. If it was one about meals, it's pretty straightforward. I want more choice in my meals. I get this every day, so I hear you, and I think there should be some flexibility. I completely understand. And I think Patty was still here, and Tina, you may remember when Sarah Hunt came and presented on documentation, and all I could think was, I can't do this. So I get it. So baby steps, but document as much as you can in writing and then take it home or to your office. But as far as an app from WellSky, I have no idea. There's several vendors, including WellSky, and I don't know if any of them have an app. I think that would be brilliant. If anyone is anyone on the WellSky user group?
We are, but I do want to add
Yeah.
to kind of this conversation, and also the idea of an app kind of reminds me a little bit of what we saw with switch tasking. I just think there's so much detail to add in. An app probably isn't ideal, but what some programs do is they've got their laptops, they've got those fancy desks that go in the cars, maybe a hotspot, and those are things that you can pay for with things like CARES Act funds and other one-time grants and purchases too. So, I hear you. I think also, an app would be nice, but probably not even the best way to document. And so if there is an opportunity for your program to maybe figure out some sort of mobile desk situation, that's one idea too.
Who documents in tablets or computers right now when you're in the field? Really? Oh, I thought there were more people using that now, especially with the CARES Act funds. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So she was saying, and sorry, I didn't run the mic over. I'm getting lazy at the end of the hour. She was saying that she uses the Notes app on her phone to take notes during phone calls, especially when she's on the road and in the car. So, and you can email those to yourself and, yep. Yes.
Yeah, I would say it's not switch tasking if we did have an app or something. And actually, I think it helps protect the residents' information better because now we're using our work iPhones all the time to use the notes to scan in that they signed permission for a fair hearing, evidence, and we're scanning that all in with our iPhone. Now, to put it in the case, I have to save it to our cloud, which we're constantly having to go around with our IT on making sure that that's restricted of who can see the cloud. Then we've got to save it and upload it to the database, where if it was easier to just send in an app or to capture it in an app, their information is better protected, and you've just cut out 5 steps for me. So a lot of it is like when you're out there, and our cases, and I don't know if I'm just speaking for my team or other programs, they've been much more intense since the pandemic. So we're having a lot more highly contentious cases. A lot more documentation is needed. It's a lot less of, you know, and Jenny's been great. Like she said, I can take pictures of my notes and upload them. But again, it's not mobile friendly currently. And so doing that is difficult. And also looking at most of our families communicate with us by text message. So being able to screenshot those and not having to save it up to the cloud and then attach it, it'd be nicer if we could do that sort of stuff and also just keep it on one device that just only goes to the database and not having it saved in multiple places.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I can see the benefit and some of the weaknesses with all these systems. But WellSky, if you're on the user group, that's something that you could bring up. Statewide, that's something that's going to have to be decided by your state. But what I could do from the perspective of the Resource Center, because we haven't drilled down into what types of equipment programs use, but that's something that we could ask and do some background and look for some best practices. So if you find that would be helpful, I'd be happy. I just added it to my list. So. Right. Right. Thank you. So she was saying it's too hot to sit in your car these days. Yes. And taking a laptop and lugging it through a visit may not be the most ideal situation. So one last question. I know you want to go to lunch. Can I just have a show of hands of who receives our emails? Yay, that makes me so happy. Okay. So thank you so much for your time today. It's wonderful to be back with you all, and let me know if you need anything.
Hey, everybody, thank you for participating and being part of this session. We're so glad to have Amity here. Thank you. Okay, so now it's time for lunch. Make sure you're back in this room, in your seat, ready to go at 1 so we can get started on time. Have a good lunch. And Dana, if you'll find me, I think I have your card.